To protect the identities of the dead, I'll just call my friends Tom, Dick, and Harry. Me, you can call me John. We'd known each other since the 3rd grade and always been thick as thieves. The year this all happened, the stars had aligned and we were all free for the Memorial Day weekend. So we decided to drive a few miles north of where we live to go camping in a small state park. We loaded up Tom's car with supplies and grabbed a cooler full of hot dogs and beer before setting out, and by sunset, we were all ready for a great weekend. That was when he arrived. He was a tall, clean-shaven man dressed in a polo shirt and khakis who smiled like a painted doll. Almost at once, I noticed a bruise on his forehead that looked pretty nasty. He stepped out from a tree line just as we were sitting down to eat and startled us half to death. It was a public campsite, but slightly out of the way, so we hadn't really expected anyone to walk through. Still, he wasn't doing anything wrong, so we just nodded and waved as he looked at us. "Hey guys," he bounded over. "My name's Dave. Don't you just love camping?" As he spoke, he stuck out his hand to shake, that too-wide grin never faltering. Yeah, I muttered awkwardly, accepting his hand, which, despite the manic force he applied to everything else, was a limp, wet fish of a handshake. "Nice car!" He nodded towards Tom's old station wagon. "Who's it insured with?" What? Tom asked, somewhere between confused and annoyed. "I'm sorry." The man Dave laughed. "I sell auto policies for Polydon Insurance. Can't seem to turn it off when I'm not at work." Right. Tom was looking around, bewildered. "So, we're making dinner." He just left that hanging, hoping Dave would take a hint, but the man just blinked at us, vacantly. We were all a little bit drunk by now, but still eyed each other nervously as he sat down on the other side of the fire. The smoke was blowing that way, and he must have been getting a face full of it, but he didn't show it. We all sat dumbfounded for a while before Harry reached into the cooler and pulled out a hot dog and put it on a stick. Shrugging at the rest of our dirty looks, he handed it to Dave and asked, "You want some food?" "Sure," Dave said, his grin unmoving on his face. We all looked around at each other nervously as he cooked the sausage and put it into a bun Harry slid his way. "Do you boys have any mayonnaise?" he asked, looking at us. "Yeah," I muttered, tossing him a bottle. "Great!" he exclaimed as if I had given him the meaning of life. "Mayonnaise is the sauce of the aristocrat, you know?" This bizarre statement was punctuated by him dumping an unpleasant amount of the white sauce onto the hot dog and proceeding to eat it in 2 bites, leaving ugly white smears around his face. It was then, staring at him in disgust, that I noticed the bruise on his forehead was gone. That wasn't possible, I rationalized. It had to be a trick of the light. "What does that even mean?" asked Tom, looking slightly green at his table manners. Dave only looked at him and slowly blinked as if he hadn't understood the question before swallowing the last bite of the sausage. "Look, man." Dave straightened up. He had the most to drink out of all of us, which is probably why he'd let it go this far. But I could tell from his tone he was beyond annoyed. "We came up here to camp with our friends for a weekend. We don't know you, so please leave." His jaw was tight as he spoke, and I watched, waiting for a fight, unsure if I would help him or pull him off. Dave only nodded, looking slightly sad, and said, "Of course, I don't mean to be a bother. If any of you are looking for a new insurance policy, however, you know where to find me." With that, he walked away down the dirt path towards the rest of the campsites. As he walked, I noticed there was dirt and sticks on the back of his clothes, as if he had been lying down in the woods. "Okay," Tom hissed, looking around at the rest of us. "What the hell was that about?" "I don't know." Dick slurred drunkenly, a menacing glint in his eyes. "But he better not show up here at our camp again if he knows what's good for him." "Okay, Dick, calm down," Harry said placatingly. "He's probably just lonely." "Lonely my ass," Dick muttered darkly. "There's something wrong about that guy." I didn't speak, but I knew what he meant. I couldn't put a finger on it, but something about Dave had been extremely wrong in a subtle way. Not just an awkward dude who didn't understand social norms, but genuinely wrong. "Did any of you guys notice he never blinked?" Tom asked after a moment's pause, and I realized he was right. In all the time he sat in that smoke, he hadn't blinked once. Hours passed as the fire burnt down and the beer drained away, eventually leaving me alone in the early morning dark. Tom and Dick had hit the booze hardest and gone to bed hours ago, and Harry had just left to brush his teeth at the small cinder block bathroom a little ways around the camping area. I would have gone with him, but somehow I didn't want to leave the camp unguarded with Weird Dave around. So I was relieved when Harry came walking back into camp. Then as he got close, I noticed how pale he was. As pale as a ghost. "You okay?" I asked, jumping to my feet and grabbing his arm to steady him. "Yeah," he muttered. Just saw something weird is all." "Dave?" I asked, pointedly looking around, as if expecting to see him grinning from the wood line. "What?" Harry asked, confused, then seeming to shake himself. "No, nothing like that. It was some kind of animal, I think. I just caught a glimpse of it running across the road, but it looked wrong." I tried to push, but he wouldn't or couldn't explain more, and eventually I let him go to bed and started making my own way towards the bathroom. I carried my big flashlight with me in case I saw whatever had spooked Harry, and I played it around the campsites as I walked. A few tents, a couple RVs were darted around, but mostly the site was deserted. Unusual, because this was a holiday. Then I saw it, running across the road maybe 20 yards in front of me. At first, I thought it was a dog, but it didn't move right. I swung my flashlight around and managed to catch just a momentary view of it, and I understood why Harry looked so scared. It was about the size of a large dog and hairless. That wasn't the creepy part. The creepy part was how it moved. Almost spider-like. Startled, I stepped back, almost tripping when I felt a hand catch my elbow and steady me. It was Dave.
"Hey, watch your feet. Don't want you getting hurt."
This close, I noticed a few things about him. One was that his eyes were not only unblinking, but dull and unfocused. Immediately, my mind went to drugs, which would also explain his odd behavior. The other thing I noticed was how cold his skin was. It was a warm night, but he seemed almost chilled. "Hey, thanks," I stammered, straightening myself, before I turned back and ran the flashlight across the road. "Did you see that animal?" I asked Dave. Not for any reason, but because it was easier than standing there with him in silence. Well, that's creepy. Or so I thought until he answered, saying,
"That's not an animal,"
in a warning, almost urgent voice. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before, but only for an instant, before the dull look returned. Not an animal?" I stammered. "Then what is it?" It had looked like, I don't know what. Pink and fleshy was all I could say for sure.
"I don't know,"
Dave said cheerfully.
"but if it damages your friend's vehicle, my company offers a great deal on all-inclusive insurance if you bundle your home and auto policies with us."
His grin shone white in the moonlight as he made the rambling sales pitch, and I had had enough of him. So turning, I just walked away down the road. I made it to the bathroom and brushed my teeth. But when I went to leave the building and head back to camp, to my horror, Dave was standing right outside the door. He didn't say anything, just smiled at me, unmoving. In the light from the bathroom, I got a better view of him now, and instantly noticed that he seemed somehow bulkier than before, as if he had gained weight around his midsection. But that didn't make sense. It had to be a trick of the light, or something tied around his wrist under his shirt, perhaps. "What's your problem?" I shouted, fear creeping into my voice now.
"No problems. We at Pauladine make insurance easy."
He spoke with the same faux-friendly salesman's voice as before, but he sounded different. Sluggish and slurring his words, almost drunk. I was sure that he was on drugs. Angrily, I just pushed past him, walking back to my camp. When I got there, I crawled into my sleeping bag and went to sleep. It was probably around 2 a.m. when I fell asleep, so I didn't wake up until close to noon. When I did, I found the rest of my friends already up and nursing hangovers. Surprisingly, I felt fine. I hadn't gone as hard as Dick last night, but I had kept up with the others fine. We had a full day in the park, and then one more night before we drove back. And despite how weird the whole situation with Dave had been, I was determined to make the best of it. So guys, what do you want to do? Head down to the lake? Harry asked, gesturing his chin towards a path leading into the woods a little way away from our tent. I'd rather hike up the mountain, Tom said, shrugging. But I'm good with whatever. Dick just grunted and took a deep pull from a coffee mug. A little worried after everything that had happened yesterday, I got the guys to help me load all our valuables into a locked car, and then we set off for the lake. It was actually 3 lakes, one roughly V-shaped, and the other 2 like eyes as they appeared from a distance, almost like 4 claw marks on the earth, which I suppose was why they were called the Bear Claw Lakes. They were cool in emerald green, reflecting the colors of the trees in the sky and the sparkling in the sun. The sort of place that makes you want to jump in and swim just for the sight of it. We spent a great few hours messing around, jumping off rocks and pushing each other in, and although around 4 p.m. it started to lose its luster, it would have been a great day if it had ended there. Tired, we made our way back up the winding trail towards the campsite. The campsite had been completely trashed, as we stood dumbfounded where the fire had been the night before and looked around at the slashed tent and upturned cooler. Should we call the Rangers? Harry wondered aloud. No cell reception out here. We'll have to drive, Tom said absently, crouching down to examine a rip in one of the tents. I'm gonna kill that damn salesman, Dick yelled, kicking an empty can into the woods out of frustration. It wasn't just Dick. Everyone blamed Dave. Even Harry, who always assumed the best about everyone. But somehow I didn't think so. The image of that pink fleshy thing last night, I couldn't get it out of my mind. It hadn't been a dog, and I think Dave had been right about it not being an animal either. At least, not a wild animal. I'd only caught a glimpse of it, but what I had looked more like a person to me. A person moving on all fours with something seriously wrong with their joints. I had never been superstitious, but something about that thing had given me the heebie-jeebies in a way that had grown stronger the more time had passed since I'd seen it. And that's when I noticed the thing, I don't know what to call it, hanging from the tree. It was made from a beer can that was taken from our cooler, the metal cut and flattened out like a sheet of paper, then folded origami style into the figure of a small man, his limbs bent at odd angles. He was tied with twine at the center of the triangle of sticks and hung from the nearest tree to the campsite, slowly twisting back and forth in the breeze, the metal glinting in the light of the evening sun. The thought of finding and confronting Dave flashed through my mind, but what would be the point? Let's just go, guys, I said, pointing towards Tom's car. They all nodded, clearly uncomfortable to spend more time here. When we all climbed into the car, it wouldn't start. Now in a story, this is where everyone would have panicked, but there had been a few other campers around this morning, and whatever was wrong, we all assumed it could be fixed, or at least we could get a ride to a mechanic. So we didn't worry much as we opened the hood to check the engine. The battery was missing, and looking under the car, we found the fuel line had been cut, or on closer inspection, seemingly chewed through by something. So, leaving Tom and Dick to work on the car and watch what was left of our stuff, Harry and I went to find another camper who could help us. But there were none. The campsite was completely deserted now, with all the other guests seemingly having left while we were at the lake. Both of us tried to rationalize and make excuses, but we both knew something was deeply wrong. It was getting late by then, and none of us had cell phones to try and call out. Even if we did, I doubt there would have been any reception out where we were. So reluctantly, we made the choice to spend the night in the car and try to hike out in the morning. They all thought Dave was a psycho who was messing with us now, though I still couldn't shake that thing from my mind. Neither could Harry, who admitted to having similar feelings when I questioned him, though his suspicions still lie with whoever or whatever Dave was. I couldn't blame him. From what he said, I gathered he hadn't got as clear a view of that thing as I had. The sun set and night came in like a blanket, almost calm, until around 10 o'clock, an ear-splitting scream broke the stillness of the night. It was a man's voice, clearly in extreme pain, yelling and crying wordlessly. It seemed to go on for an hour, though it was only around 5 minutes, and then silence returned to smother us. "What the hell was that?" Tom hissed, looking around at us, just a pair of wide eyes in the dark. Nobody answered for a long moment until Dick exhaled a long breath and whispered, "We've got to find them. They're hurt." "Yeah, we can't leave someone out there injured with that psycho." Harry's voice was shaky with nerves he was clearly trying to suppress. Bad idea. My voice was definite, and Tom agreed with me. But I could already tell they weren't going to be dissuaded. So I did the good thing as a friend, and I ran after them. A choice I would regret for the rest of my life. We slowly made our way through the trees, our flashlights playing around the woods looking for anything out of the ordinary. When we found it, or more specifically, him. Dave was lying in a clearing about 10 feet from the edge of the woods, his face twisted in a mask of pain. His stomach was split open in a ragged line from chest to crotch, with blood pooling around the corpse. "It opened him up," Harry said in a hollow voice. But among this scene of terror, one thing hit me with a sense of pure revulsion stronger than I have ever felt. Leading away from him in the blood were dozens of small, twisted human tracks from what looked like very young children crawling on all fours. "Let's get out of here," I mumbled, stepping back from the clearing. As I stepped back, I raised my light a few inches and caught something across the clearing like a baby with a broken back, standing on its hands and feet splayed out, insect-like beside it. Its hands and feet turned the wrong way, and then as I watched, it raised its little head, mouth dripping with gore, and began to cry. The next thing I remember, I was running, Dick's heavy feet pounding the ground right on my heels as I sprinted headlong through the woods. Bursting into the clearing, my foot caught on a branch and I fell hard, feeling something in my wrist break. I forced myself to my feet and I kept running for the car. Dick reached it and flung the door open, leaping in, and I reached it moments after. Holding my arm as pain lanced through me, I turned and looked behind me for Harry, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Get in," Dick hissed, his tone bordering on hysterical. I wasn't listening. I couldn't abandon Harry. I wouldn't. "Harry!" I yelled, looking around desperately for any sign of him, but nothing. Not even the sound of nighttime animals. And finally defeated, I climbed back into the car. Dick was sobbing, and my breath was coming in sharp, pained breaths. "What happened?" Tom almost screamed, turning to look from me to Dick and back again. He got no answer. Instead, Dick swore, slamming his fist into the back of the seat, gripped by some kind of panicked fit, and I was pretty sure I was about to throw up. "What happened?" He was fully screaming now, a mix of fear and anger etched on his face as he looked from me. "Something got I managed to hiss out between clenched. "You left him?" Tom sputtered, clearly not getting how bad the situation was. "Opened him up." We all went silent, like a switch had been thrown, at the faint sound of Harry's voice. But it wasn't right. It was oddly blank and toneless, and the delivery was stilted and awkward. Turning, I could see him at the edge of the clearing holding up his stomach as if he were about to be sick, and then he seemed to shake himself and stand up straight. Walking closer, I could finally hear him mumble, "Opened up." Wordlessly and almost without thought, I found myself leaning forward, fumbling for the door lock in the front seat. "What are you doing?" Tom hissed, sounding scandalized by my actions. "Open up," he said, walking up to the car window and leaning down to look in like a cop writing us a ticket. Only he was wearing a dirty shirt and smiling like something was physically pulling back his cheeks. "Open up," he said again, almost naturally. Tom reached across for the lock, but found himself pinned by Dick, who held his arm to the dash, crouched forward and shaking. He had a wild, half-crazed look in his eyes, and his voice was faint and breathless as he whispered, "That's not him, man. Come on, guys." Harry slurred these words from outside the window, then seemed to shift as he finished, "Open up," his tone now totally natural. Then he repeated, "Come on, guys, open up," almost perfectly natural, calm and cheerful as he stared unblinkingly into the window. A long few minutes passed as we sat frozen. The thing that used to be our friend calmly looking in as we waited. His speech grew more natural, and he started to talk coherently. "Real funny joke, guys, but come on now, just let me in." "Let me in," he began to chant, growing more frantic with every repetition, that death mask grin never slipping an inch as he started to shout, "Let me in, let me in, let me in, let me in." On the final sound, he made a noise between a laugh and a scream and began to beat his head on the door until blood ran down the glass. Then for an instant, he looked confused, the smile finally falling from his face as he mouthed one word clearly through the glass. An instant later, the smile was back and wider than before. Muscles on his neck stood out and began to twitch under the strain as he fell back and began to writhe on the ground as if he were having a seizure. The word he mouthed to us in that moment of clarity was "run." We all listened to our friend for the last time and scrambled out the doors on the far side of the car, bolting for the direction of the access road that led out of the park. Or at least I thought we all did, but as I reached the last turn before the car would be out of sight and glanced back, I saw Tom on the ground and something white, naked and fleshy, forcing itself into his mouth while Harry held him down. My feet pounded into the gravel road and my chest was burning with overexertion. The pure fire of adrenaline sang in my veins, pushing me beyond what I could do and into the area where I risked hurting myself if I continued. But I didn't care. Dick was a few feet ahead of me down the road and sprinting for his life as we passed the dark silhouette of the bathhouse and ran towards the entrance of the campsite. We stumbled to a stop, realizing we were not alone. A figure was crouched in the middle of the entrance, its head cocked like a curious animal as it watched us. The shadows of the trees played a camouflage pattern of dark and light across its pale, sagging skin, and a long pink tongue lolled from its grinning mouth and over one of its eyes. Its head was twisted so that they looked out from beneath the mouth, and a mane of dark, wild hair fell from that to the ground. It didn't move, just sat watching us. Dick didn't say anything, just sank to his feet and began to quietly sob. I looked around for an escape and saw Tom and Harry standing behind us, slowly walking forward. Harry with a natural gait, while Tom limped and spasmed unnaturally, though even as I watched, seemed to grow more coordinated. "Come on, we gotta go," I hissed, trying to pull Dick to his feet, but he had always been larger than me, and limp as he was, it was like lifting a sack of wet dirt. "Wake me up," he muttered incoherently as I tried to pull him to his feet. But all I managed to do was overbalance both of us, and we fell to the roadbed. The pain of landing again on my broken arm caused a galaxy of stars to explode inside my head. White hot lines of anger laced up my arm and into my chest, but I didn't have time to pass out. So I forced myself to my feet, swaying drunkenly as I tried to catch my breath. Tom and Harry were closer now, though the beast still watched silently. Its crooked head gave off an almost bored energy. "Dick, we have to go," I shouted in his ear, but he didn't react or seem to even hear me. There was one last thing I could think to do, so I pulled back my leg and kicked him hard in the mouth. There was a crunch, and blood poured from his broken teeth, but through the pain and confusion in his eyes, I could see his mind return. "Come on!" I shouted, grabbing for his arm with my good hand. Slowly, he pulled himself to his feet, almost bringing me down again. But we stood, and after a moment of unsteadiness, began to move towards the edge of the woods. At first limping, and then stumbling and finally running. We crashed through the underbrush, my mind using the pain of twigs slashing at my face to refocus itself. Eventually, exhaustion, aided by the realization that we were hopelessly lost, forced us to stop and take stock of where we were. We were alone in a tree-shaded hollow formed by two moss-covered boulders leaning against each other. Shaking from exertion, I leaned against one and slid to the ground, letting its cool surface ground me back in reality. "Where are we?" Dick asked after a long time of tense silence. "I dunno," I wheezed, my chest still burning and my heart racing like I was about to die from the wild run in the dark. Far more exercise than I was used to. Hysterically, a useless part of my mind promised to buy a treadmill if I lived. The rest of my mind condemning it for wasting time, which was equally useless in our situation. "We're miles from the road." His voice was sluggish and whistled oddly through the broken teeth as he talked. It was clear that even the few words he had said were torture for him, and I felt a stab of guilt go through me. "Sorry," I started, but he cut me off with a shake of his head. "Not important." His slurred voice turning the syllables into separate words. Then he glanced around at the thick trees. Instantly, my body tensed, ready to resume our run, but he walked over to a large pine, whose lower few feet were scarred by the horns of a deer. "Look, the road," he muttered, pointing up at the tree and testing a deep gouge for footing as he spoke. "No," I hissed, "it's not safe." He responded with a painful sound that I think was supposed to be a laugh. Slowly, he pulled himself up until he could reach a branch. Unsteadily, he yanked himself onto it before pausing a moment to catch his breath, then repeated the process, moving higher. Should I be the one to climb? I was smaller and lighter, but with my broken wrist, I could never make it off the ground. Slowly, I watched as he faded into the shadow of the upper branches, the occasional grunt of effort and swaying of the pine the only indications that he was still on this planet. "What are you doing?" came a toneless, choppy voice from behind me, and spinning on my feet, I saw him. Tom was standing a few feet away, smiling like the Cheshire Cat, his unblinking eyes slowly moving from me to the tree and back. My back was to the boulder, and the thing that used to be my friend was in front of me. I had nowhere to go, and the fear and exhaustion seemed to fade as a sudden calm flowed from somewhere within me. The realization that I was going to die was freeing, in an unpleasant way. "What are you going to do?" Tom asked, his voice somewhere between a robot and a mocking tone. It enraged me to hear this thing, this monster, pretend to be my friend. So as it lunged, I shifted to the side and pushed off with my feet. My broken wrist was crushed against the rock, and for maybe half a second, my world went dark. As my eyes focused, I watched the twisted Tom thing's head smash into the rock, its neck turning at an angle with a sickening crack like firewood. It seemed to shake spasmodically as it collapsed into a limp heap at the base of the rock, and to my shock, I saw tears in his dying eyes. Then he screamed, "John, run!" Dick was a few branches above us now, and he screamed for me to run, but it made no sense. Why should I run? The feeling in my arm had gone beyond pain into some new, indescribable sensation, and the cool ground felt good against my face. Running would require an effort that I simply did not possess. Almost lazily, my eyes drifted to Tom, and I tried to focus on him. Something was happening. His crumpled form seemed to twist from within, and blood began to stain his shirt. Dick leapt from the bottom branch to the ground, throwing up a cloud of leaves. I heard a sound of pain. Then, limping over, he grabbed me, and as I had done to him before, he screamed for me to run. But I couldn't. My eyes refused to leave Tom. A burst of blood and some other fluids gushed from the wound to mingle on the ground as a dozen little things spilled out from under his shirt. They were twisted. half-formed abortions that screamed with a wailing cry as they flopped on the ground. Even so, this close, I could tell that they were baby versions of the twisted man thing I had seen the previous night and had again blocked our way to the road. I remember that I screamed, but nothing after that for a span of minutes at least. Next thing I know for sure, that isn't an image or a sound disjointed from context in my mind, is that I was running through the dark woods, or quickly limping at least. I had an arm around Dick's shoulder, and somehow I knew that he had hurt his ankle jumping from the tree, though I couldn't remember how. There was a knife-sharp line between seeing the dying baby things and now, where I knew I had lost time in between. It didn't matter. Tom was dead. Really dead. And as I stumbled through the trees, I had to fight to not let grief overwhelm me. He had been my friend. But like Harry, he was gone. Dick had seen the road close to where we were when he reached the top of the tree, and we were limping towards it now. Some distance behind us, I heard the sound of a thing running full sprint through the woods. It was getting closer, but we couldn't move any faster. Dick's feet slipped and his weight caught me, and soon we were both falling. We hit the ground and rolled into something cool and wet. A creek bed, some small voice in my mind observed. I couldn't even feel pain at this point. It was as if my nerves had burned away. Just a distant sensation of wrongness told me how bad my arm was. Shifting from where I lay, I stared up. There was something warm in my eyes, and they were having trouble focusing. Still, atop the bank, I could see the form of Harry smiling down at us. His shirt hung open, revealing the swollen flesh below, pregnant with more of the nascent things that grew in blood and pus. "Tom opened up too soon," he said matter-of-factly, but nothing was making sense anymore. I felt stunned. I felt disconnected. I felt high. I felt like my mind had broken under the weight of all I had seen, and I was analytically watching myself go insane from behind my own eyes. I didn't care. Dick screamed a feral, inhuman sound and flung a rock at the hairy thing's head. It impacted with a thud and left a visible dent, but it didn't flinch as the rock bounced away. Still, Dick roared until the rough sound of it made me sure he was damaging his throat, hurling anything he could reach in a frantic attempt to die fighting. I only shuddered quietly as I willed myself to my feet. Harry's movements grew unsteady as Dick's projectiles did more damage to his dead body. I knew it was too late. I half walked, half fell up the other side of the creek, my feet on autopilot as my eyes tried to focus on a gap in the brush where I could see a red, reflective stop sign. Two screams followed each other in quick succession behind me. I knew one to be Harry finally hatching. I could only hope that Dick had killed him and caused those things to spew out prematurely like with Tom, but the hoarse sound of Dick's final wail dispelled any hope. I could hear them gurgling behind me, like the random sounds of an infant and the chittering of insects as I stumbled towards the stop sign, towards salvation. Beyond them, I heard another sound, a deep guttural growl that I could only assume was coming from some other older, darker thing. I didn't care. If I could only reach the red sign, I would be fine. It glowed like a beacon, even as the roar got louder. Then there was a squeal, high-pitched and unmistakably man-made, before everything went dark. The driver's panicked voice as she fussed over me blurs into the sound of the paramedics shouting numbers as I was wheeled under some artificial light. A confusing slideshow of disjointed images and words is all that I have for what feels like a long time after that. Blood loss. A dark figure looks down at me, momentarily blocking the light. Severe concussion. A stabbing pain, then a feeling of cool numbness flowing from it. Have to. Sweet, narcotic darkness. I woke days later in the county hospital, confused and in pain. They had taken my arm. They had taken my friends. I was alone. The police came later. Time still wasn't making sense and asked more questions than I could keep track of. It took a while before I understood that they suspected that I had killed my friends. I guess technically I had killed Tom at least. Or had I? No. That thing with the twisted head, the mother of all those foul infants, it was the killer, the monster, the demon. Eventually, they went away, and I learned later that the investigation had been dropped after the coroner examined the bodies. He killed himself, I think. Nothing much made sense for a long time. Everything was still a blur of doctors and nurses and cops and people I don't remember, flitting in and out of my memory like ghosts. Ghosts. I am haunted by ghosts. My oldest and best friends taken from me by whatever that was. Eventually, my mind almost began to work again, and the doctors sounded less worried when they spoke about me. A few weeks more and they released me to go home. I called a cab. It drove me from the hospital, up my driveway, and stopped in front of my house. Then it left and took me to the ferry terminal, where with just the clothes on my back, I purchased a ticket and left the island I had lived on all my life. Hanging over my garage from rusty tacks I used to hold up Christmas lights were 3 little metal figures twisting in the wind. That old fool, you did it again. Welcome back to the channel. That was an absolutely wonderful and wild ride that you took us all on. Now, while I really loved the setting that you chose and the characters that you wrote, what I really found fascinating about this story was the life cycle that you gave the thing, as you chose to call it. It was kind of like a combination between the parasitic wasps and the zombie ant fungus, in that it takes control of the host and uses it to spread the baby things far and wide and to infect others. And you know what else? I thought it was a great touch that the host could sometimes break through whatever mental control the parasite had and pass on messages and warnings. That was really, really cool. So there were a lot of moving parts in this story, far too many for me to get into in this video here, but there were also some really fun references to creepcast episodes. So if you guys are fans of that, you probably noticed and know exactly what I'm talking about. So this was another wonderful entry from a wonderful author. Please support his work and check out the original story. I have a link to it in the video description below. Now guys, if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to my channel. Also, let me know what your favorite part of the story was in the comments section below. So as you can probably tell, I am still pretty tired from the wedding I was at last weekend. It was a lot of fun, but I lost my voice there for several days, so I've been furiously trying to get this video together, so I am pretty beat. I just got back from work, I'm putting the finishing touches on it, and then I'm gonna go crash hard. So I'll see you guys all later. Peace.
To be you, Uncle Magnetti, I'm watching you. Inside your mind I twist and turn, feed on your fear, watch it burn. No escape from my gaze, my hunger's delight, your terror the beacon guiding me tonight. Every screen is a window, I'm there every time, bound by the glitch, a ghost in the rhyme.
Special shout out, Patient Zero, dear subscriber. For screens and wires, I am your cyber survivor.
Uncle Magnetti, I want to be you. Uncle Magnetti, I'm watching you. Inside your